Right here, I've got a Summit Stage 4 Pro LS cam. The question is, how good is it? In this video, we're going to run this Stage 4 Summit Pro LS cam. Not just on one combination, but on two, a 5.3 and a 6.2. Not only that, one's a cathedral port and one's a rec port. Does it work on both? Our first test of the Summit Pro LS camshaft came on a 5.3. This was a naturally aspirated combination, but we did eventually run this same camshaft with a Vortex supercharger, and it did very well, as we would expect. Now this combination, as we went over the combinations before this, the 5.3 liter was from Strictly Performance, but it's important to note that you could get these same things from a bone stock 5 liter from the wrecking yard, because the essentials are still there. I mean, you still have a set of 706 heads, you still have the factory style piston, and all of this combination would still work with a bone stock one from the wrecking yard. It doesn't have to have the ported 706 heads like this combination did, although those obviously help. But we've seen this kind of power from just putting this camshaft in a stock motor, so it works really well. Now here is our combination, the Strictly Performance 5.3 liter, and to get things started we ran it with an LS9 camshaft. So it's a factory LS9, it is a factory camshaft, obviously it never came in the 5.3, but it's also important to note that this LS9 camshaft makes a lot more power than a factory LM7, the factory 5.3 cam. I mean, and we're talking by a lot, we're talking about it'll change the power output from a typical 5.3 that will make 355 horsepower or so. If you stick an LS9 camshaft in it, it will be, 410 or 420. So the LS9 cam is already a lot better than a factory cam. So now let's take a look and see how much better the Summit, that Pro LS cam is. And this is a Stage 4 cam. I'll give you the specs on it as soon as we add that camshaft. But on our Strictly Performance 5.3 with the LS9 cam, this combination was doing pretty well. It made 428 horsepower and an even 400 foot-pounds of torque. So it was already a fairly healthy combination, and we ran this 5.3 as we described earlier, but this thing was also equipped with the factory truck intake and a stock throttle device, so the early truck, not even a Trailblazer SS, and it had a set of long tube headers on and the Holley HP Performance, so it was doing well. Now here's what happened after we installed the Summit camshaft. So we got a big jump in power, and not only that, even though we started our run at 3,000 RPM, because let's be honest, how many people I get asked that a lot. Hey, can't you do wide open throttle at 2,000? I want to know how often you think you're at wide open throttle at 2,000 RPM. Because if you're doing it like in a truck or something, it's going to downshift in any kind of automatic, it's going to downshift into a lower gear. I don't know how you could hold 2,000 RPM at wide open throttle, or in what situation you'd actually do that. But sometimes we do run it down that low. But on this one we're starting from 3,000 going up above 6,500, which is kind of the range for these camshafts anyway. But on the Summit cam, this was a Stage 4 cam, and it offered a 625/605 lift split, a 234/247 degree duration split, and a 113 plus 3.5. Now this camshaft will fit with a factory piston to valve clearance, and we did measure that, so it was fine. It was also fine on this somewhat modified Strictly Performance combination, although it did have a factory style piston in it, so it should give you an idea that this is a pretty big camshaft for a 5.3 liter, and as we'll show later on, it also works pretty well in a 6.2 liter, because that camshaft is pretty healthy for these combinations. So equipped with that Summit Stage 4 cam, the power output of our 5.3 liter jumped up to 475 horsepower, and peak torque was up as well to 418 foot-pounds of torque. So that's a pretty good healthy torque gain. And the thing that I like about this camshaft, this particular combination, is that a lot of times when we put camshafts in it, we'll see a trade in power from low speed to high speed. So we can pick up power at the top end, but a lot of times we trade power down low. Now that would be less likely on this combination, only because we started out with an LS9 cam, and the LS9 cam is kind of notorious for being soft down low, which it is. It has a really wide LSA. It's kind of designed for a positive displacement blower combination that already has a bunch of low speed power from the immediate boost response. So they soften that part up with the camshaft and improve power at the top, and that's exactly what an LS9 cam does. But the Summit cam was better everywhere, offered a lot of power, even on this 5.3, and as I said, this is a healthy camshaft. But it worked well, good for a 5.3, and it ended up working even better when we added a fast manifold, because when we put a fast LSXR intake on this, the power output jumped over 500 horsepower with this camshaft, which is pretty healthy for a 5.3. Now let's take a look at our 6.2 liter. Our second test of the Summit Stage 4 Pro LS cam, that's a mouthful, was on a larger 6.2 liter. This was actually an L92 combination that we had taken off the variable cam timing and just put a fixed cam in. To get things started, we put a factory LQ4 camshaft in and ran the 6 liter with long tube headers, the Holley HP management system and stuff. We went over all that beforehand. But it's important to note that when you're testing these camshafts and you're going to run something that's like this Stage 4 cam from Summit Racing, you want to measure, you'll want to check piston to valve clearance, because every LS combination is different. Obviously, when we test it in a 5.3 liter, that has the smallest intake valve. It's a cathedral port head. The valve drop on that head obviously is different than on the 5.3 than it is on the 6.2 liter, because the 6.2 liter had rectangular port heads and a bigger valve, different valve drop. You know, the piston could be in a different position. They're different pistons, so you really need to measure it, because you're getting close with a cam like this, and it's important to have enough piston to valve clearance. It's also important, obviously, to have the right valve springs, and on these there's a lot of good valve springs out there. Sometimes we run that single beehive spring from Comp at 26918, although more often than not we like to put a good dual spring in. Like, Brian Tooley has a good dual spring, the guys from Summit offer one, Comp offers one. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Just make sure that you match the spring to the camshaft and the intended RPM and usage and stuff, because the spring rate is very important. And it's also important to note that more spring pressure is not the answer. You need to have the right spring pressure for your camshaft and RPM, and especially the cam lobes. Those things need to be stable and stuff. So pick the right spring for your cam, and your cam experts can help you do that. This is our 6.2 liter with the LQ4 cam. As I said, we're all dialed in with the Holley and stuff. So equipped with that LQ4 cam, this 6.2 liter produced 445 horsepower and 460 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty typical of a small factory cam like this. It almost always makes more torque than horsepower, and we see that in the 4.8 and the 5.3 and the 6.0 stuff with those small factory cams. But here's what happened after we installed the Summit cam. And again, this was the same cam that we ran previously in the 5.3 liter. So that camshaft, just as a reminder, 625, 605 lift split, 234, 247 degree duration split, and a 113 plus 3.5. And as you can see, because we started basically with a milder cam on this 6.2 liter than we did on the 5.3, the difference in power we're showing here is much more dramatic. But had we started with the factory LM70 cam, we would also have a dramatic change in power from the 5.3 liter. The other thing that helps this thing have an even bigger change in power, for instance, and so what are we talking about? We went from 445 horsepower and 460 foot-pounds all the way up to 568 horsepower and 510 foot-pounds of torque. So it's a big change in power from just the camshaft, cam and springs basically. But the other reason we have such a big change is because this motor is bigger, so it's going to want to make more power, and it has better cylinder heads. I mean, the 706 heads flow probably 100 CFM less than these rec port heads do. So this, even more than the 5.3, this 6.2 liter combination was begging for more camshaft. And when we put a good camshaft in it, like this Summit Stage 4 cam, we really get a big change in power. I mean, from 445 to 568, you're talking about, 124 horsepower, 123, 124 horsepower gain. So that's a lot from a camshaft. But the reason for that is because we started with such a mild cam, and this combination is big, has lots of head flow, and really the intake manifold on this L92 is very good too. It's that LY6 truck manifold, which, as I've shown previously in other testing, is basically a duplicate of the LS3 cam in terms of power. I mean, it looks different and it's shaped different and it's a lot uglier and it doesn't fit on some combinations because of the low profileness of the LS3, but fundamentally from a power standpoint, they basically make the same power. So that's why the 6.2 liter responded so well. Not that the Summit cam's not a good cam, it obviously is. And it worked very well on both these combinations, both on a 5.3 and on a 6.2. It worked very well, made lots of power. Let's get to our conclusion. What did you guys think about this test on the Stage 4 Pro LS cam from Summit Racing? I mean, it worked well on the 5.3 liter. It worked well on the 6.2 liter. It also worked well on cathedral port heads and rec port heads. You know what else? It also works well under boost. I'm Richard Holdner, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. I'll keep testing these cams.